the first enforcer of the tree bylaws that Zavitz created, which is the only thing that really prevents someone from cutting down all the trees on their private land. Mel Swart, another person inspired by Zavitz, his big achievement was the creation of the Niagara Escarpment Plan. This is a forest that Swart helped protect in St. John Conservation Area, all from that area. And that is the end of the presentation, which I think gives you a good overview of some of the impact that Edmund Zavitz had on the province. Yes?
So that's a lot of material to disappear. Where did it end up, in rivers and lakes?
New York State.
Well, a lot of it ended up in Lake Ontario. It was a major pollution of Lake Ontario. And it, yes?
Well, I was just going to say, John, you know, you got to read the book, because one of the things he didn't tell you or hasn't talked about is the lumber barons. Ontario's revenue, most of Ontario's revenue came from forest rights.
Yeah.
So no, like they wanted to cut it down and sell it, and that's why a lot of the clear stripping went on.
So was that the reason why now the lumber companies are forced to replant?
Yes, yes.
Yes. That's why Zavitz lost his job, because the politicians wanted to sideline him, so they didn't want all these rules that he was trying to implement. But he really started the lands and forests thing.
Yeah. Yes. Thank you, Frank.
I'm from originally around Burton area. That was the problem they had up there. Like my mother and father had a farm up there, and my mother said when she moved there in the 40s, that if a wind came up, you couldn't see anything for miles because of the bull sand, and it would blow right through Burton. And it was about 1950 that area was they laid the trees down. And the train in 1866 was the Canadian Pacific Railway through there, and it was the main line from Montreal. At that time, the Pacific that comes through Oshawa was not built. So that was the main line going to Western Canada. And they come in and they stripped all the trees, both sides of the line, and it left a mound right on the top of the ridge. And then it went to wind come up, there was just loads of sand. And they reinforced that 50. Now, we lived on a farm. It was like a gulch right at the back of the farm. The Bowmanville Creek started on our farm. And when I was a kid, I liked digging tunnels. And I went back and I was digging this tunnel. And we went down about 6 inches of sand. And there was about a foot of ash below that. And I guess Dad said, oh, they just dragged all the trees in there. It burnt there for weeks. And that's where they burnt all the trees down. So they could open up the farm.
Well, thank you for telling that, because it's a terrible history that you've elaborated more on. Yes.
So is Burton, is that a suburb of Enniskillen?
North of where?
Enniskillen.
Okay. Yeah, yes, sir.
When Zavitz reforested, it looks like most of it was pine.
That's right.
What species did we lose that was not reforested? What species of trees?
Well, yeah, the favorite trees were white pine and red pine, and they would later use cedar.
What seems to be replaced on that?
Well, what had been destroyed in the place was more a mixed forest. Like, obviously from the pictures, the pine were there, but they tended to be the superstory of the forest. So below them you would have a more diverse forest, which would be trees like black cherry and walnut, trees that are very good, for woodwork.
But they're very slow growing.
Is slow growing, and as these forests, become more like a natural forest, these other trees are creeping in. And it's very nice to walk through the Northumberland forest and see that. The younger deciduous hardwood trees, coming in through essentially, birds bringing them air or wind. Yes.
The original forest in this area was what they call the climax forest was beech. The maple trees only live about 100 years. The beech can live 300-400 years. So you start with the pines, and they provide the cover, and then gradually the deciduous trees come in. And a lot of people think that maples are final stage, and they're not. Beech are. But one of the problems with getting back to a beech forest is that we've drained, like civil engineering has drained the soil so much, beech needs a lot of water. But we may never see the beech forest 300-400 years from now.
That's a good point. Yes.
They were huge.
The Sega Beach area, is that how it was formed? Because for miles, it's just sand and pine trees.
That's quite possible, but I don't know the history that well. It's serious. A lot of these War of 1812 battles, like battles of are often called battles of the beech woods. And you go there today, and it's so heavily drained, these battle sites, you could never get beech trees there. But I don't want to pretend I know things that I don't know, so I don't want to really comment on Wasaga Beach.
Well, a lot of the area around Simcoe County is reforested.
Yeah, it is.
It's quite sandy soil, and there's huge acreage of reforested land.
And the person asked earlier, well, where did the soil go? A lot of it could be, dumped Wasaga Beach, but I just don't. I know a little about the complexity of ecology, that it's sort of dangerous that comment on something that you haven't read up on. I know, but I have to respect the limitations. Yes, sir.
The same thing's going on with the farmers that are taking out all the fence rows. So you're getting some erosion of it. You see the stones, the all ground.
Well, this is true, and the tree bylaws are not sufficient to protect the hedgerow, because they're just enough. I think generally it's 2 acres minimum of a forest, canopy, and hedgerows seem to be fair game under any kind of law, although there's something called a landscape bylaw, but to refine an instrument like that to protect a hedgerow would be very, controversial, but it may have to be done.
What they've done out our way is all the hedgerows and lanes and that used to have big high maple trees. They used to be beautiful. Now they've gone in and they've cut that all down, so they can drop their cultivator at one end of the concession and just keep going.
See, one way of dealing with problems like that rather than regulation is just to pay the farmer through something like a conservation easement. And, farmers are given subsidies for other things. Why not to protect the landscape?
One of the reasons for that is today they're getting a lot of agriculture in there, and the farms are just monsters.
And
not only that, they solar panels, you go up by Argyle and Senate Falls, they've got hundreds of acres of this solar panel.
And another thing too, in an area like this, that the land might actually be owned by a farmer. It could be a developer. You'd have to, search title and stuff like that. Yes.
But what was the acreage percentage, or coverage of reforestation that he was shooting for? Didn't Zavitz have?
Yeah, he had goals. Well, what his goal was, what was sufficient for brook trout habitat. And generally, if you ask people in MNR today, they would say 45% coverage is what you need. And they have achieved that in Garnaska. And it's interesting. At Dundurn Press, I got a lovely free book. It was Trout Streams of Ontario. And the Garnaska is one of them. Garnaska. It is #1 trout stream in all of Canada, or eastern Canada, that apart from like large forested blocks of the north. And #1 trout stream was like a dying thing. The trout were all minuscule and hardly worth anyone's time fishing. So it shows you the dramatic thing that I think that stream the forest cover increased from 5% to 45%. And all these problems that people talk about, agriculture and the environment, phosphorus pollution, and they don't exist there because the streams are all buffered by trees. It shows you the amazing impact these sorts of things can have.
Okay. Any other questions for John?
Okay, this is our last question.
You talk about the old growth pine in that area. Have you ever been up south of Alliston for the pine ring? There's, I don't know how many acres up there, it used to be Gibson property, with all the old growth, the big white pine.
No, I haven't been there.
And, I think the river goes through it. So, continue to go to
Not a Sega, which has been well reforested, and as a result does have fish like trout.
Okay, thank you, John.